on to kia ora, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dominic and Nick.
Hold on.
Now we move to item 10, which is probably the main attraction of the agenda today, the Mayoral Proposal. So this is our opportunity to consider the Mayoral Proposal for the annual budget and determine the key items in his proposal for consultation. So, Your Worship, the floor is yours.
Kia ora tātou, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, I just can't help but notice the Mission Bay fountain playing behind you, Madam Chair. I'm sure that's there for strongly symbolic reasons. I look forward to this item going through just as quickly as the last three. Look, before I get underway, I just want to make some introductory broader comments, and that is to acknowledge that this year has been a long year and a tough year, and for a number of people on this call at the moment, even tougher because of their personal circumstances. So I hope that at this point of the year, when I glance out the window and see the harbour and the blue sky, and our minds are starting to turn to other things, that we can maintain the sort of qualities that we talk about in the affirmation for our governing body meetings, and that is that we have insights into the views and circumstances of others, that we maintain patience, good humour, tolerance and courtesy. And, I am thinking of those of you that I know have been under particular stress, and acknowledge that, and hope that the coming summer gives everybody a chance to recharge their batteries, to meet with friends and family, to enjoy the sunshine and to travel outside of Auckland. So that's something to look forward to. But we've got a few days of work left, including this budget. Madam Chair, look, COVID-19 obviously has dominated the last 2 years of our council. 2 years ago, and acknowledging your role as chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, we passed an emergency budget. It was really tough. We had a shortfall of $450 million that year, and we wondered how the hell we were going to deal with it. But we did deal with it, and we worked together to make sure that we had a budget that responded appropriately to it. And then, of course, last year, we had the recovery, or this year actually, the recovery budget, our 10-year budget. And again, we had a ongoing loss of revenue of about $300 million that we had to cope with. We dealt with that as well. And at the same time, we invested, $31.8 billion into infrastructure for the 10-year plan that the city badly needed. And that was a great achievement on the part of this council. So coming to the last budget of this political term of council, the ongoing effects of COVID are going to be felt once again. We know that we won't be getting probably the dividend from Auckland International Airport Limited, $60 million. The revenue from the port will be reduced in large part because of COVID. The Auckland Transport faces revenue losses of about $100 million overall, and Auckland Unlimited likewise from a range of different factors. So the context of our budget is that it's another tough year, but equally the context is working together. We can find a way through those tough challenges, and we can deliver for the people of our city. On top of COVID, but maybe related to it because of the stimulatory packages that the government rightly brought in to deal with what was expected to be a deep recession because of COVID. Far from having a deep recession, we've got very full employment, and unfortunately we're also suffering from a higher level of inflation, which the Reserve Bank says will come back down to 1.9% in a year to 2 years' time, but is currently high at 5%, and higher interest rates. And it was ironic that a year ago, or was it 2 years ago, people were saying, why does council hedge its debt? It's costing you hundreds of millions of dollars. Guess what? As interest rates go up, we're saving hundreds of millions of dollars. But we also have additional costs because not everything is hedged. So there'll be additional costs of about 15 million in interest rates. and costs that of inflation that are likely to be workforce cost rises of about 23 million and non-staff inflation costs of about 19 million. So not an easy year, not a year in which we will be able to splash money around. Not that I believe council does splash money around, but it does mean that some of the things that we'd love to be doing, we can't be doing because we're dealing with those immediate pressures. So where does this leave our council fiscal position for 2022-23? Well, the rise in costs and the fall in revenue potentially leaves us with an operating deficit of around $85 million, some of which is ongoing. That's about 2% of our projected operating deficit. And, you know, it's very hard to say whether the sum will be lower than that or even potentially higher than that because of the incredible uncertainties that exist in this COVID-related age. Really fortunately, because of the prudent approach that we have pursued in the last two budgets, we have some headroom to deal with those costs. Officials will tell us in the next paper, and have told us already, in fact, that if we were just to take that at face value and say that is an operating deficit, our rates would be going up by 8% in the coming financial year. That is not an option that I am choosing to present to you because I believe that we have other and better options. And what I'm proposing to you is that we simply maintain the 3.5% rate increase that we set out in our long-term plan, recognising that last year, or this current year actually, we were at 5%, it will come down to 3.5%. So how do we bridge that gap? Well, I thought long and hard about it, and to a degree there didn't seem to be any real solutions to that. We were given pretty late notice actually because of the emergence of those inflation and interest rate costs at late notice. But being involved very much in the Three Waters negotiations with government, I was aware of the fact that last year Auckland Council got a fairly miserable $3 million out of a $761 million package that the government has already paid out. $3 million out of $761 million, though we're a third of the population. That will, to a degree, be remedied in the coming term because the government has announced a further $2 billion package, and of that $2 billion, Auckland gets $509 million. The government has also announced, and I have confirmed by telephone calls and correspondence with the Minister of Finance, that from the 1st of July 2022, Auckland will be eligible for $127 million and a few dollars in excess of that. That can be used by us for either OPEX or CAPEX. And it's there will need to be a funding agreement with government. Government doesn't simply throw the money at you and say, you know, spend it as you wish. Won't be going and increase councillor salaries. You'll all be disappointed to know. But the criteria are very broad for the use of that. Not only can it be OPEX or CAPEX, but it can be for a wide range of things that involve well-beings of council. They specify some areas where you could put it towards the Three Waters, housing infrastructure, and other areas. But there's some very broad terms that are set out in the criteria for which we would receive that money. And I'm told by the Minister's office that our needs would fit within that criteria. So it seems to me that this enables us to have some time before we address some underlying problems. That time is really valuable because a year hence, we will know much more about what, if any, the ongoing effects of COVID will be. We'll know much more about what the projected level of interest rates and inflation might be. And it gives us a full year in which we look at a range of sustainable long-term measures to deal with an operating deficit. And we need that time. 4 weeks ago, we were told, well, if you have to react now and it's an 8% rate increase, that doesn't give us time to talk to our public. It doesn't give us time to look at all of the options. This money from government does give us that time, but we will need to use that time, and we'll need to be aware that it would be imprudent of us not to use that time to address the underlying issues. They do need to be addressed with a long-term solution. So we will continue to follow a prudent approach, which has been the hallmark of our council in our recent terms, and that will be it's not just a case of, look, costs have gone up, we'll put that on the back of the ratepayer, and it's not a case of costs have gone up, let's borrow some more money and cover that. They are not prudent approaches, and we need to look at a range of other things that we need to do. Amongst those will be continuing to press the value for money initiatives that I put great emphasis in the last term, and the chair of the Finance Committee is very supportive of. It will also look at what we actually do as a council. And the chief executive has come to us and said, we need to have a look at optimising our service delivery, because you can't keep adding new functions, but never say, look, there are some other functions that are now lower priority and may not be important. And we've already authorised the chief executive to come back to us with a list of options as to how we can reduce services that are low priority in order to fund services that are high priority. And I've not asked for further savings above the money that we will build into this budget, which will be $90 million in savings ongoing. We're doing that this year. We're more than halfway towards that goal. The year before last, we saved $126 million. When we put our mind to it, we achieve it, and we do it on behalf of the people that we represent, to show that we are prudent in how we manage their finances. So we will be doing that, but I'm also conscious that apart from COVID, our council now has an asset base worth more than $60 billion. $60 billion. Now, that's great because it shows that we're adding to our asset base to deliver the infrastructure that our people need. But what's kind of less great about that, I guess, is that when you have an asset base of that level, you have to depreciate it, you have to meet the interest costs on it, you have to maintain those assets, you have to renew those assets. So we do need to look at underlying ways where we make long-term and permanent savings, and I'm recommending that that is the path that we follow, with at least $15 million of permanent savings in the 2 years following the budget that I am now proposing. I want to emphasise that in this budget, I am sustaining the commitment to fully depreciate, fully fund the depreciation of our assets that we will do by 2028. I think that is important. We'll also need to continue to look at the sale of non-service assets and non-strategic assets. And we've done a lot of that, and I think we've done the right thing. We've got some big projects coming up around car park buildings and around other buildings, major buildings that council owns, and we've discussed that in other places. I want to deal next with a proposal that, at the request of some councillors, our officers came back to us to discuss, and that is the potential sale of Auckland International Airport Limited shares. I want to put out straight up front that I said definitively at the last election I did not support that. Now, I'm a vote of one around this council table, but I said that I would not support it and I won't support it, and that is not in my proposal for this budget. And there are good reasons for that. I've talked to a whole lot of you, and I know there is a majority of councillors that don't want to sell the shares, and the reasons for that are obvious. First of all, we have an operational budget deficit, and you don't sell assets to pay for an operating deficit. That's like any one of us selling our home in order to pay for our groceries, and that doesn't make sense, and I don't think anybody believes that it does. Secondly, I've just got to say, and I want, hats off to the old Manukau and Auckland councils who decided to keep their airport shares. And that investment has delivered hugely to our city. Right up until COVID, we were getting 60 million a year in dividends. Now, if we weren't getting that, to have the same revenue, we would have had to have put rates up by another 3%, and I certainly don't support doing that. Secondly, we had something called the Cameron Partners report back in 2015. Some of you will remember that, and they said sell the shares now. If we'd followed that advice, we would have lost the appreciation and value of shares of $1 billion, which was a bonus to Auckland ratepayers in the next 4 years alone. $1 billion. If we'd sold in 2015, that value would have gone to the long line of people that are queuing up that would be queuing up to buy our shares. So, if you look at how our airport shares have performed in terms of dividends and in terms of rising value, they've outperformed the vast majority of any other shares on the share market. The report, and this is my final point about this, the report by our own officers, and again, looking back to the EY Cameron Partners report, showed that, yeah, there is a short-term benefit when you sell shares and you could pay down debt or pay for something else, but there is a long-term cost, because once you've sold those shares, they can never be sold again, and you lose the ongoing revenue. And within a half dozen years or so, the net loss to council would be greater than the net benefit that it had received from it. So that is not on the table in terms of my mayoral proposal. I want to now look at the issue of increasing costs of our capital projects. And, I keep coming back to COVID. It's unfortunate. And I'm looking out the window at the CRL project. And because of COVID, level 4, for 10 weeks, that project could not work. For a much longer period of time under level 3, they were working at a lower level of productivity because of the impact of the precautions that they had to take. That will undoubtedly, one, delay the project, but not hugely, we hope. But secondly, it will add to the costs. And that may apply to some of our other major projects. We don't know what the additional cost will be at this stage, and CRLL have told us we won't know probably until the end of next year. They've also told us that the costs won't come to bear on council in the coming financial year. It may more likely be, 24, 25 or somewhere thereabouts. That's not absolutely clear yet. But we can't ignore that. The first approach to dealing with that problem has to be, the first approach will happen naturally because of COVID and because of supply chain difficulties. That will slow down the delivery of our capital projects, which ironically will defer the costs, the operating and interest rate costs that fall on council. So in the short term, it supposedly helps us. In the long term, it won't. And the first thing you'd have to say, if those costs went up hugely, what we would look at doing is saying, what are the lesser priorities of those projects? And we may need to put them back for some time. There is another ironic bonus from the government's Better Off package, is that there is another $375 million that the government will deliver to our council under what they've already announced as part of that package. And what I would urge, we don't do it now, the new council will need to look at it, but I would urge the incoming council to say $375 million, a very good use of that money would be to cover the increase in capital costs of the projects because of higher inflation, higher interest rates, and the COVID delays. I think that would be prudent. Councillors, I want to come now to the last item, but certainly not the least item on my mayoral proposal, and it's in relation to a climate action targeted rate. While we've been overwhelmed with dealing with COVID, we know that in the longer term, a far costlier and more serious crisis that we will face on an ongoing basis, it won't come and go like COVID will, is the issue of global heating. And, I don't need to go through all of the details. There once was a time when there were a lot of climate change deniers. There aren't many now, but replacing the climate change deniers are those that say, yeah, it's happening, but no, we won't do anything about it now. Look, I think most people on this call know that that's totally unrealistic. We have set ourselves a target for what we do with global warming. And that target is to reduce our global emissions by 50% by 2030. 2030 is only 8 years away, 100 months away. And the target is a really tough one to achieve. It's a target that's based on what our government has set for itself and what the international community at Paris and more recently in Glasgow have reaffirmed for themselves. And we can see now what the costs of climate heating will be. We can see it in rising sea levels, which is already starting to happen, and we can see it even more so in the more frequent occurrence of severe weather events. We've been through the worst drought that we can remember in Auckland's history, and we've seen in other parts of the country the worst flooding that they have ever had, and that included in us in the northwest being affected somewhat by that. So the situation is serious now. It needs to be acted on. It's going to be more threatening for our kids and our grandkids. So we need to act. And not only do we need to act now, but we're told from everybody from our own council officials that have really worked hard on this, the change needs to be not incremental, but transformational. And in this budget, while we're dealing with the immediate pressures on us, we've got to think for the future and the future vision that we have for our city. We've got to think about the legacy that we want to leave for those that come after us and our kids and our grandkids. And we won't be remembered for the fact that we unanimously passed a climate emergency declaration, that we unanimously passed a really good climate action plan. They are, that represents the good intentions of our council, but we won't be remembered for our good intentions. We'll be remembered for whether we acted when we needed to. And I know there is no good time to put in a targeted rate. There'll never be a good time, but it is the time to do it now, because time is not on our side. And the longer we leave it, the larger the costs that we will leave to coming generations and coming councils. We've walked the talk. We've now got to act and honour the undertakings that we've made and the declarations that we have passed. The hardest of those is transport, because we've said we'll cut it by 64%. 64% cut in emissions in the next 8 years. Now, did we say that not meaning to act on it? No, I don't believe that anybody behaved in a way that was insincere about that. We said transport is where we have to act. 43% of our emissions are from transport. We need to do it. And our officials have said, yep, this is a huge challenge, but it's possible. But it's only possible if we put our money where our mouth is. And that means that we need to be able to fund the changes that we're making. That funding cost, everybody's familiar with the figure now, for a medium residential property in Auckland, the cost would be $1.10 a week. Now, I'm not making light of that. I've seen people say, oh, it's a quarter of a cup of coffee, or it's the cost of a single cigarette. For some people, every dollar counts. But what I am saying is that could there be a better investment of $1.10 a week than to help secure the future for our kids and for our mokopuna? And my belief is there isn't a better investment. The co-benefits of this package are really big. Buses. There will be another, according to Auckland Transport figures, another 15 million passenger trips a year as a result of this package. 15 million passenger trips a year on public transport. 1 million people across the city will benefit from having improvements to the bus services within 500 metres of their door. And 170,000 Aucklanders, for the first time, will have a frequent transport network within 500 metres of their door. And the really great thing is that while it benefits the whole of Auckland, in particular, it benefits low-income areas that have been really poorly served in the past by transport services. We know that the costs of transport are going to go up. There'll be more congestion. There's in the wings in Parliament a congestion charge that will be introduced. The cost of petrol is at a very high level, and the cost of maintenance of a car. This falls really heavily on those people at a low income. And we said that we'd support a congestion charge. We agreed that as a council, provided we looked after the equity issues of low-income people and provided there were alternative services to choose from. This package enables us to take the step of embracing a congestion charge for the future when the government brings it in. If we don't do these things, I couldn't support a congestion charge. Not if we were going to cripple low-income people that come in to work at low wages in the city from the south and the west. And, you know, we've also got things like our Community Connect card that will help in that regard. As well as the buses, we know that ferries produce 21% of our emissions from public transport. We need to replace a half a dozen of those ferries now. We're going to replace them with new diesel ferries. No, we're going to replace them with electric ferries and the infrastructure electric ferries need. This package covers that. It covers much more safe walking and cycling opportunities. And that's really important because, again, the best advice that we have, how do you get down emissions? The very best way of getting down emissions is by persuading people that it's more convenient, accessible, affordable, and reliable to travel by public transport and to leave the car in the garage. So this is the area we need to act, and it's really important. On top of that, we've got the urban ngahere, the canopy cover. Oh, I sound a bit weary here. How many times have we talked about the fact that our lowest income people have the lowest canopy cover? That when we need protection against the increased heat that comes with global heating, we need shade. The people that will miss out most will be those that have the least canopy cover. And this enables us finally, it's not a huge sum of money, but enables to plant 15,000, mature native trees, up to 2 metres high, and to green and make more pleasant those places of our city that don't enjoy that at the moment and have the lower incomes that they have to live on. So what all this adds up to is 574 million that we as Aucklanders will produce, 127 million more from additional fares because more people will be travelling by public transport, and 344 million from government matching funds that are not just likely but necessary and will be there because the new regional land transport program will require our options, and so $1 billion package, we can make a real difference in this budget. And I want just finally on that to say, why a targeted rate? Because on the two occasions that we have taken major targeted rates to our public, the water quality targeted rate and the natural environment targeted rate, 2-to-1 Aucklanders have told us, yes, we support that. Yes, we're going to get behind it in both Colmar Brunton polls and in the submissions we received. And why do they support that? Because they said it's transparent. We know what it's going to be used for, why we need it, and we know that it's guaranteed to be spent on the area that you say that you're going to spend it on. And that's why a targeted rate is the option. And the public have told us two things. 89% of the public we surveyed, I think 2019-20, said council needs to be doing more on climate change, and an almost as high figure, over 80%, in a Colmar Brunton poll said council really needs to provide more regular, reliable and frequent public transport. So this proposal meets what Aucklanders have told us they want. So in conclusion, and my apologies for the length of the discussion, budgets are never easy, and this certainly isn't an exception to that rule. However, when we were elected, we weren't elected just for the good times. We were elected to deal with the hard decisions that have fallen on us because of the circumstances of the time that we are serving the public in. So we need to rise to meet those challenges and to make sure we have a responsible budget. But we were also elected. Why did we stand for office? We stood for office because we really wanted to make a difference. We wanted to make this a better city for our people. And what this budget has the potential to do in this climate action targeted rate is to be transformational, to lay the foundation for dealing with global heating, playing our role in our country and our world, leading by example, doing what we've pledged to do in the resolutions that we've already passed by this council. So I commend the budget to you. And I would like at this point, Madam Chair, to move the recommendations in my name and ask you if you're happy to support those recommendations as the seconder.
Absolutely, thank you.
So we'll move and second those recommendations. And please, can you just note in red, there are a couple of small changes that have been made after I've talked to other councillors and they've indicated a desire to have those there. One is to include with the operating cost reductions and capital deferrals, the possibility of non-strategic asset sales. And finally, in a discussion with Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, thanks Bill for your help on this, that when congestion charges come in, we need to review the system to find out, when we know how much money will come from the congestion charge, how we would rationalise a congestion charge and a climate action targeted rate. So I'm happy to absorb both of those recommendations and once again commend them to you. Madam Chair, back to you.
Ngā mihi kia koe, Mr Mayor, thank you for that. This is not the first time we've asked you questions or the first time we will have further discussion or whakaaro on this. But for the sake of public record and the order I've got with me, I've got 3 questions so far. 3 people wishing to ask questions or partai. I've got Councillor Sayers, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Darby. So that's the order I've got so far. I've got a separate comment list. So if you could, councillors, please respectfully put your name in the sidebar should you wish to ask a question or note a comment. And our first partai or question is in the name of Councillor Sayers. Councillor Sayers, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Your Worship, for your detailed and passionate presentation of your mayoral proposal. Now, my question may not be directly answerable by you, Your Worship, but I suspect that you've got other officers that might be able to answer it because it's an economic question. But if you are able to answer it or need support from other officers, I understand that and I'd welcome that. So it's really around my question is around the climate action targeted rate, and because we tossed around politically last year of its possible inclusion in last year's annual plan, but it wasn't included in it. And to my understanding, it was because we felt that due to COVID and the impact on family budgets, it wasn't good timing to put it through at that stage. It wasn't that wise because of the general hit that people had taken. And so what's the economic situation for families across Auckland this year as compared to last year? I assume after 107-day lockdown that family budgets would be more tightly squeezed now than they were last time during our annual plan setting processes. So can someone comment on that?
I'm happy to have a go at it. And
sorry, Worship, I'll just can I just have?
Yes, sure, please.
Someone
Sorry,
comment.
just let Councillor finished.
Sorry, I thought he had. My apologies, Greg.
That's all right. Worship, no trouble. I'm just trying to make it as clear as possible that if just comment from yourself and anyone else about the impact on the hit of family budgets being any worse or not as bad relative to last year.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. And last year, you'll recall, we did put some climate action into our 10-year plan. It was $150 million, and that's $15 million in expenditure a year, which was helpful. But as we all recognised, excuse me, at the time, not enough. I said before, there's probably never a good time to introduce any increase in rates. And we have, for that reason, balanced out our ambition to do a whole lot more about climate change with not wanting to impose too great a burden on our ratepayers. And I'm conscious that one thing that will, I think, make it easier is that we have managed, despite the difficult times, to keep our rate increase at the level that we projected way back in earlier long-term plans and in the most recent long-term plans. How are people being impacted by COVID? Well, I think it varies. I mean, there'll be some individuals who during COVID, because they maybe they lost their job or they were only getting 80% of their income, found it really hard. And that's why we had the demand for food packages. There'll be some businesses, if you relied on tourism or you relied on the hospitality market, that have been hit. But the truth is that the economy overall is a whole lot better than what we feared would be the case when we first confronted COVID. I remember sitting around the council table and some councillors getting really emotional about the fact that we were projected to have 15% unemployment. Did we get 15% unemployment? Nothing like it, not even a third of it. And now we've got the highest employment level and the highest wage rises that we've seen, in a decade. Are we getting feedback from our council officers that people are finding it difficult to pay their rates? Well, we put a package in the emergency budget, set aside $50 million to help people who wanted to defer their rates because they were suffering hardship. A tiny fraction of that was taken up. I heard a Radio New Zealand report saying, there's more delay in people paying their rates. Actually, I checked that out with council officers. They said, no, it's about the same level as it was pre-COVID. This is not to deny that some low-income people are finding it tough, but the lowest income people, of course, in our society don't pay rates, or they don't pay them directly because they don't have the privilege of owning a home. They don't have the privilege of gaining the huge capital gains that we as homeowners have earned, but they are not directly affected by rates. And those that say, well, they pay rates through their rent, they do. But rent isn't based on the costs facing the landlord. It's based on what the market is prepared to pay. So I think our most vulnerable people are shielded from that. Our most vulnerable people have benefited from some of the central government initiatives to lift pay. And for most of us, certainly all of us sitting around this table, there's not one of us that would say that $1.10 a week is going to cripple our budgets. Obviously it's minor to us. It might be more important to others. But I do believe very strongly that it is affordable, and the work that Andrew Duncan has said, and I'll finish on this point, is that we are well under the level that is widely regarded as being the threshold above which you can't go to keep your rates affordable. That's regarded as about 5% of income, and we're down at the 3% of income level. So I don't make light of any rate increase, but all of us want to go to heaven and nobody want to die. All of us want the great things that we've done in infrastructure and that we'll do on climate change. And, natural human thing is we'd rather somebody else paid for it, but there is nobody else to pay for it. We've got to take responsibility. We've got to rise to the challenge. We've got to do what's right for our kids.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Sayers, just to add to that, you might want to just check that affordability memo. It was sent to you, dated 23rd of November from Andrew Duncan.
All right, well, thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Worship. Look, Madam Chair, I'm just going to digest what the Mayor said. I'll just foreshadow that I might put up an amendment. I'll just give it some thought and come back to you or your staff, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you for that. That's all your questions though, Councillor? Right, my next question, thank you for that then. Ngā mihi ki a koe. Pātai question from Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Your Worship, I thank you for the breakdown that you've given us today. I've got two questions, but in terms of context, I do recognise that this has been an enormously difficult budget. And I also realise the inherent risks ahead of us as a council. Even if we get to next year, we're not out of the woods. So this is a time that we do need to be pulling together. And I also appreciate the fact that you have recognised the hardship that many families might face in terms of rate increases. So my question goes, firstly, that Auckland has never had a fair share from any government, I think, and you talk of the 127 million Better Off payment. That is, of course, linked to the Three Waters. And I'd like to commend you for your negotiation. That's not negotiation that the wider council are involved in. It's negotiation that you have done directly. But what I want to know and have clarified now, does that come with no strings attached? Because there's a lot of people who are very unhappy about Three Waters, and does, the acceptance of that sweetener come with some ongoing perhaps commitments, and does it in any way negate your ongoing negotiations as part of the group that of other mayors that you're involved with the government? So could you
Yep.
just tell me that it is a gift from heaven and it doesn't have strings attached?
Not
Yeah.
heaven.
It's a fair question, councillor, and no, it doesn't come with strings attached. Look, we've been told that the government is going to mandate the Three Waters change, and the government has the power to do that. I don't agree with them mandating it, but they have the power to do it, and they've shown a very strong inclination that they will do that. And what we're trying to do in terms of the working group that I'm on, and that's going to be a painful exercise for me over the summer period, we're trying to make that fit as closely as we can with the concerns we've expressed about accountability and responsiveness. And I've led that charge, as you're aware, and I will continue to follow the mandate that you all have given me, and follow the mandate that will arise from what people tell us in the consultation process that we're undertaking. So this is not a way of buying my support for those aspects of the reform that I don't agree with. As a council, we've said, look, there's a lot of things in the reform that we like: uniformly high water standards across the country, the chance to invest more in infrastructure, etc. And we'll even go along with amalgamation if that is required, even though we've got the scale we need. But we do not agree with giving up our ability to require the water services entity to give effect to our broad strategies, and we do not agree with being a minority governance body for assets to which we have contributed 94% of the total. So those are, from my perspective, well, I've got to show some flexibility in the working party, and because if we all go in with a totally closed mind, then the working party will go nowhere. But those are really critical issues to me, that I regard as bottom lines that you have mandated me to follow, and I'll keep doing that. But the second part of the answer to your question is, if the government, as I said before, has paid out over $750 million already, we got practically none of that. Am I going to say, as a matter of principle, I won't touch the money that you are paying us to do what you're going to do anyway? Well, no. I think the ratepayer would think I was a mug if I didn't take advantage of the funding that government was providing to us that we'll put to very good effect. So I have no compunction about using that money, but nor does it buy my soul in terms of my views on the precise nature of the water reform that they're putting up. We'll go in there, we'll negotiate on your behalf. What comes out of it, I don't know yet. I always go into these things in good faith and with high expectations. I'll maintain the good faith. Whether the expectations are maintained, I'm not quite so sure.
Okay. My second question, and you've heard me harp on about this for a long time, is around the desperate need that we have for congestion charging. And again, we're reliant on your negotiations with central government, because that's where mode shift will really occur. And so initially with your proposal, I was very sceptical. So I welcome today's 2D, but I'd like to do a little bit more of a deep dive in terms of my understanding, where you're saying that the council is in support of congestion charging. We know that legislation will come, but Christmas comes and it takes a long time, although we're nearly there at the moment. I want a little more comfort than just saying the regional fuel tax and the climate action targeted rate will be reviewed. I guess I was looking for you to give us the comfort of knowing when we get the congestion charging, which will have the biggest impact in terms of climate change, in terms of mode shift, and all of those outcomes that people want, that will bring an end date to the two measures that we've currently got in place. So can you give me a better understanding of your 2D,
Yep.
of how you see in practice? Because this, if it's passed, this resolution will be to a degree binding on incoming councils, and I don't want any ambiguity on that.
Yeah, well, just to take the last point first, obviously we just as Parliament can't bind a future Parliament, we can't bind a future council, and it'll be a decision that a future council will make, and the elected representatives around the table will be the ones that are mandated to make that decision. But first of all, congestion charging. You've seen the submission that I presented on behalf of council to government on that. I worked with all four political parties, and I was delighted that all four political parties agreed that demand management through congestion charging was really important for the future. And that was a huge step forward, because, you know, my big worry, and I've expressed it to a few of you, is that it's really tempting when you're in opposition to say we're going to oppose congestion charging because it'll cost you this much to drive down the motorway to work in the morning. And all four parties, when you get the Greens, ACT, National and Labor all saying the same thing, you know that it's a pretty substantial ground that you've got for needing this form of charge to get mode change, to get people to change their behaviour. Now, the challenge that we've got on this is, Bill Cashmore and myself and Chris Darby have all looked at this and worked through with officials over probably going back 3 years now. First of all, until you've got the legislation actually enacted, you don't know what the precise, what the congestion charge will achieve and what revenue it will raise. Secondly, all of the indications that I can get from central government is that legislation won't be in place to the extent that a congestion charge will be out there probably ahead of 2025, which is 3 years out. 2025, of course, is only 3 years off 2028, when the regional fuel tax runs its course and will no longer exist. When they bring the congestion charging in, a critical thing in the congestion question, the first report was, in those cities where it really worked, it worked because it was introduced carefully and thoroughly and carried people with it. Exemplars being, particularly Stockholm. And they've said that don't rush into it, do it all at once. Maybe the first step will be a cordon type system around, people coming into Auckland Central in peak hours. But it may take, and our officers have talked to us about this in recent days, it may take years after that to fully implement the system. So the wording of D, which the Deputy Mayor and I worked on together, is very carefully worded, because yes, we need to have a rationalisation of how we fund the measures to get mode change, but we can only do that when we actually have actual legislation in place and specific knowledge about what revenue will be raised and when it will be available. So the commitment is there, not to have three separate systems operating, but probably one. But we can't go beyond that wording, because at the present time, we simply don't know. What we do know is that we will support congestion charging, provided the prerequisites that councillors put in place are met. Those are equity, and those are having suitable alternative transport means. And this package actually allows us to put those alternative means in place, particularly for the lower income. And the other package that I've worked on with Michael Wood that I think is really good is the Community Connect card that will slash by 50% public transport fares for our most disadvantaged people. Sorry, it's a long answer, Chris, but hopefully that covered the question you gave to me.
I won't monopolise time, Madam Chair, and I'll let it go at this point. But thank you for those responses.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Your Worship. The next question is in the name of Councillor Chris Darby. Councillor Darby. Councillor Darby, you are on.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah.
Now it's unmuted. I think I'm with you now. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Look, just continuing, just an inquiry on the 127 million Better Off funding package. And I can see that we could continue to access that in coming years as well, most of it kicking in 24. So I'm assuming that the 127 being used as revenue is not specifically allocated at this stage, because that the conditions, the criteria state that there needs to be a funding agreement. And one of the conditions, the further conditions, is that the development of that funding agreement needs to be in consultation with iwi Māori. So is there a risk in that 127 million funding package that the final agreement with Crown and then also agreeing with iwi Māori might identify projects that are not being consulted on in this draft budget? Is there a risk there? That's maybe a question for both Mayor and possibly the Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's risk in everything, but in my view, it's a very low risk because, as I discussed with you earlier, I went through what the Minister of Finance has indicated in the budget. So, one, is this in any way a contestable fund? No, this money is earmarked for Auckland. Two, when will it be available from? It'll be available from the 1st of July next year, though it may not be in one lump sum, but spread through the year. Thirdly, is it available for OPEX and CAPEX? Yes, both, because we're talking about OPEX here. And I specifically asked that question to the Minister, and he specifically gave me the guarantee that it can be used for OPEX. And then will it be subject to a funding agreement with government? Well, of course. And that funding agreement is, what that requires is set out in this document, which, I don't know whether you can see it on the screen, which is the heads of agreement that was signed between local government New Zealand and the government. And the Better Off package is so I'll just go through this with all councillors, is in recognition of the significance of the local government sector and intended to demonstrate central government confidence in the future of local government by providing the sector additional funds to invest in local community wellbeing outcomes in a way that aligns with the priorities of central government. And then they go through some of those priorities, and they include, support local placemaking improvements and community wellbeing. But the Minister's office did make it clear that this could be used for the purpose for what we were intending to do. Do we need to talk with iwi further about that once we've got to that point in the process? Yes, that will be a requirement. We have the Independent Māori Statutory Board at this meeting now and aware of the discussions that we are having here. Is there a risk that money wouldn't be available, if this is the nub of your question, for what we intend to use it for? I think a very low risk, because not using it for the purpose that we're intending to would impose additional and immediate costs on other sections of the community. I'm confident that we would all work together collectively for the common sense outcome, that the best thing we can do is ensure that we're not prematurely placing on our ratepayers a burden of a very high rate increase, which we need to work through to find out a range of alternatives to imposing high rate increases, and we need to work out in terms of a whole range of sustainable ways of dealing with the cost pressures that we have. So I believe, just as this governing body will be supportive of using the money for this purpose, that will also be true of our partners in Mana Whenua.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. That's good. And thanks for the discussion yesterday. I think we agree mostly, and we we challenge each other in some other parts. And one of the areas I want to constructively challenge is and probably just ask you a question. We have discussed this matter in public excluded workshops, but for me, it's not just about concluding whether we sell in full or part our shareholding in Auckland International Airport. The question for me is having the inquiry. Now, is it important for you as Mayor for the council to have an open and really fully informed discussion about the shareholding and the value of it or otherwise, as opposed to what's really occurred to date that has been a suppressed and partially informed closed workshop discussion? Is that important for you that we do have an open inquiry about the airport holding? And if so, when do you think that might occur?
Well, I guess I'd refer you to the document that we've got in front of us, page 195 to 219, where there's a 60-slide presentation by our officers based on the work that has already been before council before and debated publicly before, which was the Cameron EY Partners report. And we had that discussion. That discussion, in fact, during the workshop round on the Mayoral Proposal, was probably the dominant discussion that we had. And I think that the officers laid out all of the arguments. We had a pretty robust and sometimes passionate discussion. Not everybody agrees on this, but I believe that we've had that debate. We had it in 2015, and we had it again 3 weeks ago. And I didn't stand in the way of officers bringing the material that they thought should be considered by councillors and by local board members who all attended that meeting. And at the end of that debate, I talked around to a whole range of councillors, and the very clear impression that I had was that there is a majority of councillors that aren't in favour of utilising the sale of airport shares in this budget to deal with the immediate problem of a deficit in operating funds. And beyond that, there was also a commitment by a whole lot of our councillors that they felt that the return that we got on this shareholding had served council well. So look, I mean, the debate probably won't ever go away. It will come back, but it would be wrong to say that we haven't actually had a pretty thorough debate around this issue. And all of the documents that the officers have given to us are now in the public arena in the document that we have in front of us.
So just on that note then, Mayor, the legislation actually determines the airport as a strategic asset, not council. I can't find any record at council that identifies the reasons why it's a strategic asset other than the legislation from, I think, late 90s determining that. So are you aware, or are you open to the council actually having an inquiry to determine what the strategic outcomes could be of the airport holding, rather than assuming outcomes? Because at the moment, there's not a single strategic outcome identified for the airport holding, and for a $2.1 billion investment, I find that just an outrageous gap.
Well,
are you open to having that discussion to identify what the strategic outcomes of the strategic asset might be?
The term strategic is the term that applies through legislation, and the government puts that in place, and that's in some ways it doesn't matter. You can sell strategic assets. You have to go through a consultation process, as we do with the sale of any significant asset. I'm not so worried about the word strategic. My focus and the focus of my comments in my proposal today have been around whether this asset has given a good return to the people of Auckland, both in terms of the accruing of capital value of those shares And I mentioned that, if we'd followed the earlier advice, we would have lost the $1 billion increase in asset value that accrued in the next 4 years. And the ratepayers would be looking at us and saying, what a pack of monkeys. You sold it cheap, and 4 years later, if you'd held on to it, we would have had $1 billion more in value as the ratepayers of this city. I'm also looking at, the return on the dividend, and that has been a pretty handsome return. The figures, we went through the figures, and I asked the question specifically, leaving aside COVID, which, closed down the airport and it ceased to be profitable for the period of time, understandably, how did our shares perform on the share market? And the answer that officers came back on me was it was spectacularly better than the average return on shares on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. So, over the years that I've been mayor, time and again I've had people coming to me saying, why don't you sell the airport shares? And I says, well, why do you want us to? Because we want to buy them. And why do they want to buy them? Because I think it's widely recognised across the community that these are very good shares to have a big shareholding in. And I know, North Shore Council and the Waitakere Council sold their shares years ago. Did that provide long-term solutions to long-term problems? No. It's just that we'd have a much bigger dividend if we'd kept the shares that were sold by those legacy councils. And, once again, I just want to acknowledge Manukau and Auckland who didn't sell those shares. And the whole of Auckland is getting the benefit now of the fact that they didn't sell them for a short-term gain, but kept them for a long-term revenue source.
Look, thanks, Mayor. It's very much a reply like parliamentary question time. My question was, and look, I say that with great respect, Mayor, but I guess I go back to the question because you haven't answered it. Are you willing to enter an inquiry and undertake a deliberate process to identify what the strategic outcomes of the strategic investment, $2.1 billion in Auckland International Airport, might be? What those strategic outcomes might be?
Let me be totally blunt in answering that question. No, because I don't believe that the value in holding them is strategic, but rather it's financial.
So you're saying it's not a strategic asset?
No, it's a strategic asset because the legislation says it's a strategic asset. To me, it's an asset worth keeping because it produces a really good return for the people of Auckland.
The shareholders of A2 Milk thought that about a month or so ago too.
Yeah.
Look, we'll pick it up later on. Look, thanks, Bear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. The next question I have is from Councillor Walker.
Amendment from what?
Sure. I have some questions, Mayor Phil. You may be in a position to answer them, or alternatively, it may be the officers. The first question I've got just goes to the information that we're providing now about Auckland Airport. And my question is around how much better off we would have been if we had have taken up the share offering and what the value might that have been. And I would like to know this, and I think Aucklanders need to know this, because I would suggest that it adds to the $1 billion quite significantly. So if you can just give me some assurance that we'll find that information and make it available, that would be useful. The reason I'm asking it is it goes to our decision making around the airport, because I would not like to be in the situation where the council is not available, is not able to take advantage of a prudent investment decision when that decision comes up that might enhance our strategic position, but also, more importantly, following on from your comment, might significantly enhance our financial position.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We made a decision as a council. We were offered the choice, did we want to receive a dividend, which was, as I mentioned before, about $60 million a year, or did we want to transfer that to simply increasing our shareholding? And we made the decision that I think that Aucklanders would have endorsed. We wanted the dividend because we wanted to invest that money into infrastructure and other ways of improving the well-being of the people of our city. I think Aucklanders would probably support us maintaining our shareholding, but they wouldn't support foregoing a dividend that would be spent on their behalf in order to increase that shareholding. We are an owner of those shares as a historic legacy of the city, but we don't go out and we don't work the share market. I know the suggestion was made that maybe we should buy up more shares, etc. But I don't think that the majority of councillors believe that a priority for the expenditure of our money or the foregoing of an income from that shareholding should have been to acquire more shares, but rather to spend the income that we get legitimately from those shares for the well-being of the people of the city.
Sure.
So it is a choice. If we were speculators and we were into this as a business arrangement, we might have made the decision to use the dividend money just to buy more shares. But we're not. We're a council that provides services and infrastructure for our people. And I think our people said, yeah, it's good that you've got the shares, but please use the benefits of those to improve the life of the people in the city. And that's what we collectively decided to do.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I understand all of that. All I'm asking for is some transparency so we're able to show how much better we would have benefited had we had a decision to add those extra shares. We don't have an investment strategy. I really don't want to go into that, but I'm just asking for that information so it's available. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, look, happy if officers can provide
Sure.
you for that. But if the answer was that we were putting rates up while we were buying more shares, people would say, no, please use the money to deliver the services without putting pressure on us unnecessarily for an even higher rate increase. But
Okay.
I'm happy for officers to come back to you, Wayne, and provide you with that information if they have it.
Sure. The other matters that I'm seeking information on, as it goes to the climate change targeted rate, and that is have officers given us any information on implementing behavioural change measures that could include tactical marketing to make better use, more patronage on our buses, ferries, and our trains, more and better use of our existing cycleways and walkways, more and better use of programs like car sharing and our T2 and T3 lanes. And the reason I ask this in part is there was a very small tactical marketing exercise done in Milldale, and there was a 44% increase. A 44% increase in patronage at very little cost, and quite obviously a significant increase in fare box recovery. So my question is, have the officers provided us with that information?
Yeah, I'm aware of the example of Middledale, and I use that myself. When you provide better bus services that are convenient and regular, outside of COVID, people pick up the opportunity to do that. If we want to get behaviour change, there's a push and pull factor in it. The pull factor is if the services are frequent, so you don't have to look up when the bus timetable is because you know they'll be there every quarter hour. If they are accessible, they're within 500 metres of your doorstep. If they're affordable, compared to the alternative forms of transport that you might have, and if they're convenient, people will use it. Now, the push factor is congestion. How many times have people driven down the northern motorway and been at a standstill and watched the busway, the buses along the busway go whizzing by them? I had this wager with Councillor Hills, I think, when I offered to take him back from Smales Farm. He said, no, I'll catch the bus, it'll be quicker. And he got back to the council offices 10 minutes faster. He was right. So that's, if you provide those services, and if congestion is a factor, and then you add congestion charges, that will start to amend behaviour as well. And if you make it affordable for those that are struggling, that will change behaviour. So yeah, all of the work that was presented to you and me and all of our colleagues at those workshops around climate action targeted rate were based on the very factors that we were talking about now.
So my question is, have we received any advice, any proposals for the budget around modest expenditure that I am putting up that could attract a very significant return on investment and drive reduction in emissions? Have we received any advice?
The advice that we've got, when I went to them, I said, if we were to have a climate action targeted rate, what are the best things that we could spend money on in order to encourage mode change, to drive down emissions, and to get real co-benefits for the city? And the advice that they have is the advice that you are aware of and that you've sat through a number of workshops on. I think we've done 3 or 4 of them. Their advice to us is that this is the best way to achieve the objectives that we're talking about.
Okay, so we haven't had that advice that I'm seeking. That's really all I want to know.
No. We have had advice, and I've just explained it. That there is also, and I've raised the specific thing about, do we need to promote our services, advertising spend? Yeah, that's incorporated in the budget proposals as well.
Okay, the other similar question I've got around advice is, have we received any advice on what budget we might allocate to the improved retention and protection of our existing tree canopy? And that would include street trees, notable trees, trees on private property, particularly special ecological areas, areas subject to protective covenants, and the consideration of things like the Kiwi2 Trust. So have we received advice around what budget spend we might require there to actually save what we've got, which is insignificant decline?
Yeah, we have had advice, and again, you're aware of that, and I've acted on that advice. The advice is that trying to protect our canopy cover by scheduling tree by tree is incredibly expensive, incredibly slow, and incredibly ineffectual. And the best thing that we could do would be to regain the powers of general protection that we had until Nick Smith took them away in 2012. That's why I've been on the Minister of Environment's back on a number of occasions, written letters that you have copies of on behalf of councillors, raised it at the Local Government New Zealand conference and got overwhelming support from our colleagues around the country on it. Unfortunately, both the government and the opposition are saying to us, trees come second to providing housing to meet the housing shortage. I don't think that, of course we need houses for the housing shortage. I don't think that should should allow open slather on existing mature trees. Existing mature trees on areas that we're planting on, every one of the probably the more than 2 million trees that have been planted now under the Mayoral planting program are on reserves and public areas where we can protect them. What we can't do is protect trees that are on private property, because we do not have the legal ability to do that. And even if we schedule the tree, that is still open to debate, and to have independent arbitration on, the value of the tree as against the value of the housing, etc. So, yeah, it breaks my heart when I see some beautiful trees cut down, but actually we don't have the power to save those trees at the moment. We could have the power if government and parliament determined to give it to us, and we will keep pushing for that as the government works through its Resource Management Act changes.
And the last question I've got, and thank you for your leave, Madam Chair, and that is around, have we received advice, contestable advice, around other funding tools other than general rates for climate change initiatives that may well be a better match? And they may include carbon credits, regional fuel tax, green bonds, new funding tools that the government might make available to us, enhanced fare box recovery along the lines that I've been suggesting, and increased NZTA subsidies from government that we might achieve if the government takes a stronger implementation line than what it is doing around reducing carbon emissions. Have we considered those other funding tools and whether they might be a more appropriate match?
We've considered all of those things, and the problem with most of the things that you raised, they depended on government agreement in order to put them into place. You know, I'd love to be able to say to government, look, it'd be really nice instead of us paying for any of this, for you just to meet the full bill and to do it by this mechanism or that mechanism. That's not the world we live in. What the world we live in says that if we put money up, we can expect to get matching government funds. But if we're not prepared to come to the party, then it's unlikely that the government will want to come to the party either. So, you know, it's a little bit like the regional fuel tax. For every dollar that Auckland has paid in a regional fuel tax, we got another dollar out of government. So it doubled the benefit of what we ourselves were paying for. Had we not done that, we wouldn't have been, you know, we might... we wouldn't have got the I think it's the 4.3 billion that the regional fuel tax will actually finally put into our transport infrastructure system. Likewise on this, if we didn't show that we were committed to doing this, then when it comes to the next regional land transport plan and the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, the government would say, well, we'll only give you money if you are prepared to put this as part of our priority in place. And what we're doing, we've talked to the government, of course, about what a range of options would be. The government has been fully supportive of this and fully supportive of this being in alignment with the sort of funding that they're going to bring in the future that we will gain benefit from. But if we're not prepared to do anything, it's a whole lot harder for us to say, then you should do it all for us. So that's why we are where we're at, but we did look at all of those options, and this is what our officers who have been working at an official level, well, we've been working at a political level, have come back to us with and said this is the best way of getting the money and getting the change that we need to deal with global heating. So this isn't something that's just straight off the top of our heads. This is something that, you know, obviously we as a council and our officers have been working hard on now for 3 years, and what I've got in this proposal is the best advice that our officers have been able to come up with in order to achieve the objectives that we've set for them.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Mayor.
Wayne.
The next question I have is from Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I won't be long. I don't want to prolong this any longer. There's more substantive issues to debate. But Mr. Mayor, firstly, thank you for spelling out your position on the Auckland International Airport Limited in your mayoral proposal. You do that in quite a significant section there, and not least of which in the conclusion that over time the cost from the dividend that would be foregone outweighs the benefit from the interest cost saving. So I think as far as any inquiry goes, you've very clearly articulated the requisite points there. My only question would be, though, if we're to pursue this line a little bit further, certainly in terms of your predecessor, Mayor Brown, the clear understanding or expectation, certainly from the council at that point, was that any substantive move to dispose of strategic assets, such as the airport shares or the port, for that matter, would be sought through an electoral mandate, and that was certainly the basis on which Mayor Brown operated in the first 2 terms that he was mayor. That would be sought, through an election, which of course one conveniently is coming up next year. So I would just seek your view that such an inquiry or such a mandate, that would be the appropriate means by which to seek a public endorsement of such a significance would be through that electoral mandate. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, you'd have a mandate, either the electoral mandate, and I believe that I have an electoral mandate because it was a major issue of debate with my opponent at the last election, who was keen on selling Watercare. Events have kind of bypassed that debate now, but also before we sell any substantive asset, you'd have to go through a process of consultation. But I simply, from talking to those of you that I've had the chance to talk to about this around the table, I don't believe that there is an appetite to do that. And a whole number of us actually went out at the last election and said we were not in favour of selling those assets that are termed strategic assets. And I nominated those assets as being airport shares and Watercare. So from my point of view, I made a commitment to the electorate, and they gave me an overwhelming mandate as a result of that election. And I'm not about to turn around and say to them, look, I've changed my mind. What I sincerely promised to you then, I don't believe in any longer. So that was never an option for me. But as I say, I'm one vote around the table at that council. But my very clear impression is that a majority of councillors around the table are not keen on selling those shares for all of the reasons that I've elaborated and that you and others have touched upon.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. Maybe just a suggestion that any councillor of that view can maybe seek the same mandate in a few months next year if they want to.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further pate or questions for the Mayor? Well, councillors, I'm going to take a 5-minute break before we go to comments, and then when we come back, my comments will be, so far I have Councillor Cashmore and Councillor Cooper. So it is midday, and I will reconvene at 5 minutes past 12. Thank you.